What's up, y'all? So we're going to be playing Matchmaker post UFC 311, and UFC 311 main card was pretty solid. I didn't get the chance to see much of the prelims, but from what I heard, they were kind of mid. So I'm only going to talk about the notable fighters that I feel like people really want to hear in terms of the matchmaking. So first, we're going to start off with the champ, Islam Makhachev. I mean, Islam now breaking the UFC lightweight title defense record with 4 now. Again, coming against Moicano, not the strongest win in the world. I know I made the video the day of saying Moicano could be his toughest fight and didn't age well at all. But besides that point, I think it's obvious you do Islam versus Charles. Now I get it, Charles is only coming off that win against Chandler, and he did lose to Arman, I believe, in the previous fight. But again, Charles in his performance against Chandler looked super improved. I mean, the wrestling from Charles hit new heights that we haven't seen before. Again, first fight, I get it, Islam won in pretty convincing fashion, but I feel as if we've seen some improvements from Charles, even in the Arman fight, which again felt a bit incomplete. If you want to do that fight between him and Arman to determine number one contender, that's fine, but I'd rather we do Charles and Islam, do the rematch. That fight was supposed to happen anyway, until unfortunately Charles got the cut over his eyebrow, and then we had Volk obviously step in, and so I think you do Islam and Charles too, and depending on what happens, obviously with Shavkat and Bilal, maybe we look at a 170 fight later down the road for Islam. In terms of Moicano, so Moicano again loses no stock at all, obviously, in losing to Islam Makhachev. I mean, Hanato, all credit to him for being able to step up on 24 hours notice and take that fight. Obviously didn't go his way, but I think you still probably want to keep him somewhere in that, not necessarily, you know, a high ranked fight, but I think you do the loser of Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker. And I think preferably if Dan Hooker loses that fight, you do him versus Dan Hooker. I mean, you already have that storyline a bit, you know. What was the line that Hanato said about Dan Hooker? It's like a turtle in a tree. So let's really see, though, if that turtle got in a tree for good reason. I think you do Dan Hooker, Hanato, Moicano. If Gaethje loses and he still wants to stick around, then I think you do Hanato versus Gaethje. Either fight's going to be entertaining. I would have said him versus Patty, but it looks like Patty's got a fight lined up with Chandler. Not confirmed, but that's where it seems like it's going. So I think you do one of those two, but the loser of that fight, not the winner. All right, in terms of Merab Dvalishvili, I mean, Merab, again, shut up a lot of the haters. You know, a lot of people were doubting and counting out Merab, saying Merab had no shot against Umar. I didn't. I was actually picking Merab to beat Umar, despite what everybody was saying. And off of that, I wouldn't say it was a super dominant win, but 3, 4, and 5, I feel like, especially 4 and 5, dominant rounds from Merab. Again, a lot of people can say what they want about skill set or whatever, even though Merab is a very skilled fighter. But when it comes to physical attributes, I think a lot of MMA fans are seriously underestimating how much physical attributes play a role in terms of how well a fighter can perform. I mean, look at a guy like Dricus du Plessis, who, again, may not look the most skilled guy out there in the world, but again, super explosive and just packs a lot in his punch and is just super powerful. That's a guy you look at and you say, you know what? Despite how sloppy he may look at times, that dude's still a high-level fighter. And the same thing with Merab. People were picking Umar because Umar looked the more skilled wrestler, the more skilled striker. But at the end of the day, Merab has easily the best cardio we've ever seen, not just in the UFC, but in MMA history. I mean, this dude needs to be studied in a lab. In terms of who he should fight next, this is an interesting one. This might be a bit of a curveball. I think you do him versus Pantoja if Pantoja beats Kai Kara-France. If Pantoja beats Kai Kara-France, I think you do him versus Merab. And now, people are going to think, okay, but that might be a little bit of ways away. But again, Merab wanted a break. Merab wanted some time off after winning the belt. The UFC didn't give him that opportunity. So let's let Merab, you know, rest for a little bit. You know, give him a few months off, give him some time off. Let Pantoja fight Kai Kara-France. And then if Pantoja beats Kai Kara-France, you make that fight. Pantoja at this point is due for double champ status if he wants to go for it. I mean, we've seen guys get those double champ shots for less. If Pantoja has cleaned out his division, if he beats Kai Kara-France, and Merab, honestly, in a weird way, is kind of in a similar position where he's kind of not necessarily cleared out the division yet, but I don't think there's an exciting contender right now. I'm not super excited to see him and Jan run it back just yet. I'd like to see Jan fight O'Malley in a rematch, and I'd like to see maybe Umar fight someone else. I don't really care to see Umar get a rematch. I mean, if Dominic Reyes doesn't get his rematch against Jan, Umar doesn't get a rematch against Merab. I think it's pretty simple, just as that. All right, in terms of Yuri Prochazka, again, very key signature win over Jamal Hill. I mean, in terms of the technique, looked a lot better, I think, in terms of just using some more proper and just clean boxing technique that we've never seen from him really before. It looked like he learned a lot actually from that second and first Alex fight, especially with the check hooks he was landing on Hill. In terms of what I want to see from Yuri next, it's a weird one because Yuri is a bit in no man's land, I feel like, in light heavyweight, where, I mean, if Magomed beats Alex, then that obviously presents an opportunity for Yuri, but because we still don't know exactly what's going to happen yet with that fight, we could sit back and wait and see for the result of that fight. But if Alex does win, I think you might have to do Yuri against Jan Blachowicz, win or lose. I just feel like that's a fight where ideally if Jan Blachowicz beats Carlos Ulberg, then I think you can use that Yuri fight as a way for Jan Blachowicz to potentially get a rematch with Alex or a rematch with Magomed. But even if Jan Blachowicz loses, I think that's a fight I would like to see if Jan Blachowicz still wants to stick around, even if he loses to Carlos Ulberg, just because, again, it's a fight we haven't seen yet between the two. It's a fresh matchup, and it'd be really good. You can probably do that, especially if the UFC wants to go. I don't know, has the UFC ever done an event in Poland? I feel like it's probably happened, but if it hasn't happened, UFC Poland, and again, Czech Republic right in that same area too. You know, getting a European card with some of those bigger names, not necessarily the biggest names, but there's now bigger names we've had in that region of Europe. So I think you can do that for a fight night main event, Yuri Prochazka versus Jan Blachowicz. I think that would be a good one, win or lose with Jan Blachowicz. Jamal Hill, I mean, Jamal, honestly, again, I got to give credit. I want to say this. I think Jamal Hill might have been injured. I'm not trying to make an excuse for him, but I feel like, again, the double knee sleeves, his movement looked just a bit off to me. Maybe I'm overlooking into it, but I just feel like he was constantly losing his footing constantly. I get his footwork hasn't always looked the best. Even in some of his best performances, people have said he's very flat footed, he crosses his feet, but it just looked like at times he just had a really hard time staying stable. And usually whenever a fighter is going into a fight with double knee sleeves, I just think there might be a knee injury or something going on. But regardless, you know, put on a really good fight, entertaining fight with Yuri Prochazka. Again, didn't necessarily look the best out there, but had a really solid second round. But I think the fight you do with him, which is the one that was originally booked for him previously, you do him versus Khalil Roundtree. Khalil Roundtree still needs a lot of time to recover, and I think by the time him and Jamal are done recovering, that's an excellent fight. A little bit of talk between the two as well, and it's a guaranteed knockout either way, and I think that's a pretty good fight. And now, Jailton Almeida, right? Jailton Almeida is in a, again, I preferably would love to see him go down to 205. I think there's better matches for him there, but if he wants to stick around a heavyweight, I think the guy he called out is a perfect fight for a #1 contenders fight with him versus Cyril Gane. I mean, again, if Cyril Gane wants to get back in the title picture, he's got to prove that he can still beat off those grapplers. I mean, I get it. He beat Sergey Spivak and got a very questionable win over Alexander Volkov, but regardless, Jailton Almeida, again, I know people's stock on Jailton Almeida is a bit lower nowadays, but I still feel like Jailton Almeida is still a very hard matchup for certain guys at heavyweight. I don't see him beating a guy like Tom Aspinall or anything like that, but you never know. I think you do him and Cyril Gane for the #1 contenders fight, or maybe even one of those guys can end up fighting Tom just straight up next if John Jones doesn't end up fighting Tom. But I think that's the logical next fight, and I really don't think there's going to be any pushback on that one. Reinier de Ridder. So Reinier de Ridder is an interesting case where, I mean, double champ coming out of one championship, but right now he's a bit on that prove it tour right now where he's fought GM3, just fought Kevin Holland. He's calling for top 5. I don't see it for him personally. I don't think the matchmakers put him up that high. I mean, crazier things have happened, but the fight I want to see from Reinier de Ridder, I want to see him versus Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa right now, it's been a bit of a weird spot at middleweight. Hasn't really, I mean, really the only solid win or any notable win I can remember from him recently was that win over Luke Rockhold, which, again, how much can you really say over an older, out of prime, just not in his prime, just not high level Luke Rockhold anymore. I mean, Paulo Costa, again, coming off of losses to Vettori, lost to Sean Strickland, a split decision, lost to Robert Whittaker, just right now has not really proven himself to be anywhere near the top 6. Sitting around at number 11, I think that's in the logical next fight for Reinier de Ridder, where, again, it's a solid test for de Ridder, and Paulo Costa's got to prove that he's still at least top 10 caliber at this point. If not, you kind of have to slide him down where he's going to necessarily be fighting for his ranking in the top 15, or he's going to have to move up. But I think that's the fight I want to see with Reinier de Ridder. You could go maybe Fluffy Hernandez as well, but I like the Paulo Costa fight just a little bit more because Paulo has been on a bit of a skid as of late, and Reinier, Again, coming off of 2 decent wins so far in the UFC. And I think that win over Paulo Costa would be the biggest name on his resume so far. And then I think that would set him up for a potential top 5 fight next. All right, Kevin Holland. So Kevin Holland, to me, I feel like Kevin Holland, if he wants to stick around, and at least I get it, doesn't want to fight for a belt. He's made that very clear. So I'm not going to line him for a fight that puts him in the title picture. But if he wants a fight that I feel like is competitive, but it's going to give him, potentially maybe even more money depending on how this gets set up, I think you do him versus Jorge Masvidal in Miami. Look, hear me out. I don't think people remember a couple years ago on that Izzy versus Alex card in Miami, there's a little bit of back and forth between Holland and Masvidal. There's a little bit of beef there, and Masvidal needs an opponent to return to. You want somebody who's obviously going to put on an entertaining fight, but no one who you look at is saying, okay, that's way too out of Masvidal's range. I think you do him versus Kevin Holland. A little bit of a story that is a bit forgotten, but you can reignite that flame between those two, and it's going to be an entertaining fight. I think someone gets finished regardless, and really, who complains? It's not like Kevin Holland is restricted to the rankings in any way. He can go down to 170. He's been able to make that weight pretty comfortably. And Masvidal, again, you don't want anyone too high in the rankings for him. Realistically, you want him against somebody who's going to put on an entertaining fight, but is not someone who you look at and think, oh my gosh, he has no shot against him. So I think you do Kevin Holland and Jorge Masvidal. All right, Peyton Talbot. A lot of people saying got fraud checked. I heavily disagree. Barcelos is actually a really, really sneaky good fighter, which people tend to forget. Obviously, got finished by Umar and didn't look the best in his last fight either. I can't remember the last guy Barcelos lost to, but he wasn't looking too good in his past couple fights. But again, Barcelos was always going to be a tough fight, I feel like, for Peyton Talbot, despite the odds. And I think if you want to get Peyton Talbot back on track, but you still want to keep him in that picture where he's fighting a recognizable name, do him versus Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt's got 1 fight left on his UFC contract, and he wants to test free agency. I get it, he had that fight with Miles Johns. If that fight hasn't been rebooked yet, do him versus Peyton Talbot. And again, I know Cody has the wrestling in his back pocket, but I think that's a fight we're going to see primarily 2 guys duke it out on the feet. Peyton Talbot, again, can use some time to develop maybe, once Cody Garbrandt comes back for injury. I think you do that fight either as an opening featured fight on a pay-per-view main card. You could make it a feature fight on the prelims of a pay-per-view, or that could even be a fight night main event. And I don't think a lot of people would complain, or maybe somewhere like a fight night co-main event. But I like to see that fight for Peyton Talbot next. But he seriously got to improve the grappling though. It just wasn't necessarily a good look seeing how a bit helpless Peyton Talbot looked on the ground. All right, Beneil Dariush. So this one's going to be a bit of a curveball, and a lot of people are going to think this one's crazy. But in my opinion, right, Beneil Dariush, if what he is saying is true and the UFC sticks to their word, when he said that the UFC promised him a big fight after this one, I think a guy who, again, right now, they took him out the rankings for whatever reason, but this guy's moving up to lightweight, and who else is a bigger fight for Beneil than Max Holloway? All right, look, listen. People may think this is a crazy fight, but look, Max Holloway versus Beneil Dariush, that's not a bad fight. That's not a bad fight. And maybe some people say Max Holloway should fight Dustin, which again would not be a bad fight either. But I think for Dustin, you probably want to do somebody else for his retirement fight, in my opinion. I would have said Beneil versus Patty potentially, but again, it looks like Patty is gonna get that fight against Chandler. I mean, Beneil could wait for either the winner or loser of that fight either way. But I think Max Holloway wants to go up to 155. Beneil did say he went a bit of a vacation. He wants to return around April. I think that timeline fits right into when Max should take his first fight back up at 155. And I think him versus Beneil is actually a sneaky good fight, in my opinion. I know it's not going to be one that a lot of people are really calling for, but I think if that fight gets booked, that's fireworks regardless. And last but not least, got to talk about Arman Tsarukyan. So even though Arman did not fight on this card, he's obviously got to have a fight in which Dana has said he's not next for the title shot. So who do you do with Arman versus Oh, I just accidentally spoiled it by accident. I think you do Arman versus Gamrot, the rematch. In my opinion, I thought Arman actually won the first fight, but super close fight regardless. And again, Gamrot coming off that loss to Dan Hooker, which, some people argued Gamrot should have won that fight. I think Dan took it, but again, it was a super close fight. Arman and Gamrot, again, to me, one of the most high-level fights we've ever seen in MMA, period. I think it's perfect time for them to run it back. Gamrot gets that win. He's pretty much right back in the title picture. And if Arman wins, then he gets a title shot afterwards. Basically, either guy gets put back in the title picture, win or lose. Not win or lose. Oh my gosh, no, because if you lose, you're not in the title picture. But I think that's a fight in which Arman probably shouldn't get rewarded with a higher ranking fight, in my opinion, because again, I don't know the whole entire situation in terms of the pullout, but again, Dana's probably never going to take too kindly to that. So I think you do him versus Gamrot in the rematch, and that's going to be a good fight regardless. So let me know what y'all think in the comments, and we out.